As many of you now know, I served as a United States Marine under President Barack Obama, and I was honored to serve for the Presidential Helicopter Squadron HMX-1. And I put out a video talking about the shift and change in American society since 2016, and how what I think is the ending of the Obama era. He had so much influence in Hollywood, the music industry, hanging out with late-night talk show hosts, so well respected by anywhere from baby boomers to Gen X to millennials. I remember when he left office, SNL, somebody on there sang a song, almost like he was a father leaving, like they were sad to see their father go. He had so much cultural influence, but I think that influence is waning with the loss of multiple elections, with Hillary Clinton's loss and now Kamala Harris's loss. Barack Obama has this personal he's a political force, for good or bad, but he can't get people elected that aren't Obamas. And I think that Trump, and really not Trump, but really the American people, have sort of ended that Obama era. And someone pointed out also, Trump really ended the Bush dynasty as well. So pending no, surprise of Michelle Obama swooping in to run for a future high office, I think the era of the Obamas is really virtually dead. And they'll continue to have some influence within that party as that party restructures itself. We'll see what it does, whether it goes further left or tries to moderate, who knows. But I think the American people have sort of emphatically said no thank you to the things that Kamala Harris, Joe Biden, and frankly Barack Obama were selling. But I want to say this before I go further, because I didn't get much into policy. That as I was getting out of the Marine Corps, I shared in my other video, I was at Trump's inauguration and I saw President Barack Obama in the helicopter on which I'd worked and even flown, fly overhead, and it just sort of occurred to me, one of those moments I probably won't forget, that everything's changing. My life was changing. I was getting out of the Marine Corps and the country was changing. But I didn't share much policy about that, and several people asked me to, so for what it's worth, I'm going to be very blunt in this video, and I just want to share some things with you. Take them for what they're worth. This is just my opinion. But I want to say this before I go any further. Just because I served under President Barack Obama for the Presidential Helicopter Squadron, I am in no way, none, a better Marine than those Marines who served in the infantry or Motor T or even the Air Wing. So many of my friends in the Air Wing went to other commands, deployed other places. If you served in the Marine Corps with honor, just because I was blessed or guided by the fates or by God himself, whatever the cards fell out, however it worked, for me to work in this small unit, which was a deep honor of my life, to serve our country in that way, I am not a better Marine necessarily than you. So if you served, in fact, many of my friends in the infantry, some of them who, I know Marines who weren't in the infantry, who saw combat. It's just how the Marine Corps works. My service was not better or more honorable than theirs, right? So for my Marines out there, you're my brother and sister. Man, I don't want people getting the wrong impression thinking that I'm above other Marines. No. I also don't want you to get the wrong impression and think that me and Barack Obama were just hanging out on the helicopter discussing foreign policy all day, every day. No, that's not how it works. It's a small unit. It was hard work. And I was blessed to serve there, but I was pretty low on that totem pole, right? So I was there to do work, to serve, to get things done, but I'm not some personal advisor to Barack Obama. So please don't get the wrong impression. That being said, I want to just make this video as short as I can. I'll be very blunt. While I was serving at that unit, my mother once asked me, how do the Marines there feel about President Obama? And I remember thinking, well, while you're in, you speak very respectfully of the president, and there's a reason for that, because I think there are good things about that man, and we're going to talk about that, but I respect the office because I love my country, and I still do. I see many of its flaws, and I look at its history and think it's never been fair to everybody, but I love my country. What else can I do? Our country is a collection of beautiful lands, but also so many communities of my neighbors and my friends and my family. If they aren't worth serving and even being willing to die for, what in this life is? And whether I like it or not, Barack Obama was elected as President of the United States. And so Marines in that unit were at least publicly, very respectful of that man. That being said, I think most Marines who join to serve in something like that, they have a different vision for the country than Barack Obama. So I want to say this now that I'm out. By the way, I don't see people as a zero-sum game. So if you are a Democrat, I'm not a gung-ho Republican. I'm not a party line guy. I'm not a, call me what you want. But I've seen the Democratic Party shift so far left. And yet I still don't think it's a zero-sum game. The presidency of Bill Clinton, so much I disagree with him on, but were there some things that were good or decent or worked okay? Yeah. I think some of that's a little bit true with Barack Obama, but for all the things I passionately disagree with him about that I think have been bad for our country, and I'll talk about them. If you're a Democrat, look, you're my neighbor, and I think what we have to get back to is seeing the humanity in each other. We can't all separate into our own isolation groups, retreat further into ourselves, and demonize everybody on the other side. We just cannot do that. You're my neighbor, so I'm not going to devalue you as a person because you disagree with me politically. We have got to stop this. But I want to say a few things. I remember the time when Obama was elected, there was a sort of feeling of optimism in the air. It was our first, black president, and there was so much promise of hope and change, and I was always very skeptical of this. I, in some ways, lean fairly conservative, but which I don't know how I turned out that way, but I did. I was always very skeptical, and yet I still hoped at the beginning that he would succeed. I hoped that he would make the economy begin to thrive because it was tough for me. Maybe it wasn't for you, but me and many of my friends, it was tough economically for us. Maybe he can make it better. Maybe he could end the endless wars in the Middle East that seemed to be becoming pointless. And he said he would. Maybe he would make racial relations better. And I grew up, I'm a millennial, so I have friends who are, all kinds of different ethnicities. And racial relations, I think in the 90s were getting better. And yet, I thought maybe, this man can make things even better still. But I don't think he succeeded. I think there was so much potential there, and I think he failed. I'll make the comments very brief, but I think there are three categories of things I'd like to say. And the first is economic. At first, to me, this was the key issue. And I grew up, thinking, President George W. Bush, the economy didn't do well under his, second term. And Barack Obama sort of inherited a mess. Well, maybe he can fix it. And I thought it was sort of, my older Republican friends and mentors and all these folks were telling me Reaganomics was the way. And then I saw some things that Barack Obama said, and I thought, okay, that sounds reasonable. Even his discussion with Joe the plumber, it doesn't sound unreasonable to me. And some of the things he did, I think he had decent ideas. But overall, I began to see that it wasn't really he didn't govern as an economic Marxist. He was slandered as a socialist too often by, I think, Fox News. Thomas Sowell, before you come at me, Thomas Sowell himself said he doesn't think Barack Obama is technically a socialist. And yet, it wasn't just these two sort of Obama's almost Keynesianism, his big government spending, which he had, versus Reaganomics sort of backing off, trickle down, whatever. At first, that was the issue, and that was the big issue for a lot of people. Who's right about the economy? Well, I think the economic recovery was very slow, and I think that Barack Obama took credit for the economy doing very well under Trump. So, within a year of Trump taking office, for all the things you can say about him, the economy was doing rather well within a year. And I remember thinking, at first, wait and see. Wait and see under Obama, wait and see under Trump. And within a year, things, wages were up against the cost of living, jobs were kicking, the stock market was going. He brought down energy costs, which trickles out to things like groceries. I don't think he's over here reading economic theory. I think he is just looking at what works and doesn't work and trying it out and doing it. But Barack Obama took credit for that roaring economy. You can say the economy wasn't good under Trump, then why did Barack Obama take credit for it? Now, you can say under Obama, it wasn't all bad. Sure, yeah, agreed. But it was a slow recovery, and then Trump got very little to no credit. Obama tried to take that.
And the reason some people think, well, I don't know, I remember that economy when he first came in being pretty good. Yeah, it was pretty good, because it was my economy. We had 75 straight months of job growth that I handed over to him. It wasn't something he did. I had spent 8 years cleaning up the mess that the Republicans had left me the last time. So just in case everybody has a hazy memory, he didn't do nothing.
Until the economy crashed under COVID when they forced the economy to shut down, in which case they blamed Trump. So I think economically, Obama was sort of a mixed bag and overall not very successful. Secondly, I think on foreign policy, the issue is more serious. So really, I'm not an isolationist. I leaned for a while more libertarian in that regard, not the party, but libertarian in the sense of small government, bring everybody home. And I hoped Obama would be something like that, because that's what he promised. But he wasn't. What I've since learned with confidence is that, well, I don't think the United States should be an imperialist power. I don't think we need to fight never-ending, pointless wars that end in catastrophe, where lots of Americans die. I also know that America can't be isolationist. Since World War II, the United Kingdom attenuated its own influence, largely voluntarily, and sort of handed the United States the gauntlet. And while we can't be the policeman of the world, what I know for sure, with confidence, is that if the United States backs away from world affairs and doesn't take some leadership role, the world will not run itself smoothly or fairly. All you have to do is look at the way China and Russia treat other nations, satellite nations, now, while they still have us countering them, to know this is the case. Whether we like it or not, whether you like it or not, the United States, people look to us for leadership, increasingly less, because we've done a poor job. But to some degree, they still need us to take action in the world. And herein is where I think Barack Obama failed in his foreign policy. The Atlantic is a very liberal magazine. They did a sort of exit interview, review of his foreign policy as he left office, and it was not positive. And this is a magazine that's on his side. And I think this is going to come back, tie into the third thing, and that is the thing that I think is the biggest failure, and that is social issues. Because I think for Obama, they're tied together. Now, Barack Obama is an intellectual. He's an intelligent person. He's articulate. I wouldn't say he's eloquent, but he's articulate. And his wife is intelligent also. But, by the way, there's a difference between being an intellectual and being intelligent. Trump is not an intellectual, but you cannot tell me the man is not intelligent. He's not articulate always, but he's clearly intelligent. Now, intellectual, some of them are not intelligent. But some of them very, very much are intelligent, but the ideas that work themselves out through the intelligentsia, some are wonderful, some are stupid, some are just off balance. And I think Barack Obama and his wife were educated in a way of viewing the world and America and race in a way that is off balance and not healthy. And you can, by the way, you can still read Michelle Obama's master's thesis online, and it's really talking about race. It's seeing the world through racial conflict. And even though Mrs. Obama was at an Ivy League school, even though she's got a bright future, she's fairly well-to-do, she's still seeing herself as being othered, by more people, insiders in this more privileged space for white folks, frankly. But at some point, and while I can sympathize with that to a degree, at some point, at what point are you running an Ivy League university, or you get multi-million-dollar podcast deals, or you become the president of the United States, or everyone wants to hear from you, and yet you get into an Ivy League school, or you run the Ivy League school, and yet you're still, and I'm not trying to be unsympathetic or unkind or undiscerning, but my point is, you have to put parameters on just how bad that oppression, that racial othering is. You were accepted and applauded and loved. And then to look out with some bit of spite, frankly, towards the people who elected you or the people who you now lead, that's not healthy. If you lead coal miners in West Virginia, unemployed coal miners in West Virginia, and you lead people, librarians in Washington State, and farmers in the middle of the country, and the Marines, and housewives, and everyone in between, you have a responsibility. But I think the worldview in which both Obamas, that will kind of come back to their social policy, but I think it fed Barack Obama's foreign policy. It's sort of this view of, it's postmodern, it's anti-enlightenment, which this country was sort of founded on Protestant and Enlightenment ideas. And those Enlightenment ideas in many ways were rather un-Christian, aggressively so. But also, it's anti-modern. It sort of sees institutions, anything traditional or established, as suspect, through lenses of sort of whatever is in the center of society as having power that it must have necessarily taken from other people who are now marginalized. And what we need to do is sort of attenuate the power or the influence of whatever's institutionalized or traditional or in the center and bring in the marginalized. And I think this is a dangerous worldview. Now, I can sympathize with actual people who are actually oppressed. I think we need to make sure that that's not a real thing. But the view of the world from Derrida and all these other people that I've mentioned before, Foucault, the more you bring in the marginalized, we're no longer talking just about racial minorities or Jews. Derrida was a Jew. Even the left now is, so many of it is openly anti-Semitic, which is ironic to me, because the Jews are too much in the center now, I suppose. Barack Obama, I think, saw himself as this. So the Western civilization, the United Kingdom, and I can sympathize with having problems with the United Kingdom, but when they handed that torch to us, by the way, I think the United Kingdom did a lot of good in the world that they don't get credit for. But at the same time, sure, I think problems going back to the Reformation, leading into this imperialism, sort of a my country right or wrong, instead of just loving England, you love this empire that's taking away from other local peoples and their cultures and their traditions. Give the United Kingdom credit for the good, but also be wary of the bad. I think Barack Obama sees the United States through the same lens. And so when he looks at foreign powers, I think he's a president of the United States looking at the United States with suspicion. I don't think Barack Obama had a foreign policy. The Atlantic basically said when a dictator was abusing his own people, Barack Obama said, well, I'm not going to act, but if you cross this line in the sand, that would change my calculus, I'll act. Well, that dictator called his bluff, and he started abusing his people even worse. And Barack Obama, those who inside sources said he was very stressed, sort of in some kind of despair that night, struggling with what to do because he didn't want to get us involved in another war. But at the same time, he said, if you do this, I'm going to take action. Or he implied that he would. And then he had an epiphany, according to inside sources, when he realized just because America traditionally has done something, I don't feel bound by that. I'm not going to do anything. And that was a terrible, terrible decision that he made, in my view. I don't think Barack Obama had the confidence that the United States deserves some kind of a moral leadership role in the world. Now, whether he agrees with that existentially or not, based on his views, based on his experience, it doesn't matter. He is the President of the United States, and people look to him for leadership. People look to the United States to set the tone and tempo of the way things work in the world. And it's going to be that way for at least a while longer. And so I think there was a bit of a naivete about, as with Bush, about other peoples in the world wanting the same thing that we want, freedom, democracy. The Arab Spring was in many ways a failure. Gaddafi was overthrown, and Libya has been a mess. Barack Obama has done little or nothing. In fact, in Syria today now, we're still dealing with the aftermath of President Obama's failure to act. As far as I can tell, there's no real good actor in the political realm operating in Syria now. The rebels are claiming that they're going to be good, moderate people. We'll see. But Assad was in there doing the things that he was doing because Obama did nothing. And Iran, Assad, Hezbollah, Hamas, these are all bad actors in my view, call me what you want, who sort of, together had sort of some kind of a loose alliance imbalancing the power structure in the Middle East. And Obama doing the Iran nuclear deal, which in some ways looked like, hey, we're prolonging their nuclear power, it imbalanced the Middle East further. Obama got the Nobel Peace Prize when he was elected, and he even acknowledged he hadn't done anything yet. But in foreign policy, he did little to nothing. He droned some people. Under Barack Obama, Putin walked in to the Crimea, and Obama did nothing. Special operations troops walked down the streets in the Ukraine, Russian spec ops guys, and Obama did nothing, and then Russia lied about it and said we're not there, while the video of them walking through the streets is coming out. Obama called ISIS the junior varsity team, and basically thought, well, the Middle East is under control, I've done this, that, and the other. I've let Iran and these people know that we're not the big bad imperialist powers that they say we are. And Iran hated us anyway. There was a bit of a naivete on Obama's staff, I think, going back to how he sees the world, and that these are just underemployed Muslim men who are desperate for employment, and that's why they're terrorizing people. It's naive. Frankly, it's stupid. These are deep ideological and historical differences between, certainly not all Muslims, but those who are terrorists operating in the Middle East. And when people say death to Israel, death to America, they made light of it, saying, well, yeah, but they don't really mean this. Of course they mean it. Give me a break. So Obama's failure to act or to have any consistent foreign policy, except for, I think, his own existential crisis about being the leader of a country he thinks is, at some deep level, oppressive. Again, I can sympathize with the past oppression or a lack of fairness, at the very least, to racial minorities, to French Catholics immigrating here, etc. But then to extrapolate from that a false view of history or self-image of your own country is not good. And this, I think, comes back to what I think is really the main issue with President Obama's ideas, his presidency. Call me what you like, and even if you are a member of the LGBTQ movement, you feel you consider yourself to be gay or bi or whatever, I hope you see that there's been a shift, if you're a reasonable person, in the way this movement and the way the country views this movement and the way this movement has presented itself to the country. What was presented to me and my friends as millennials, and again, I've always leaned fairly conservative for whatever reason. So many of my millennial friends bought the idea that what we want to do is have small government in social domestic issues. So we want to have small government, and let's get the government out of people's bedrooms. Let's let people do what they want to do in the privacy of their own bedroom without government interference. And that's presented as being smaller government interaction and actually more fair. That is not at all what's happened. Now, if you get out of your ideological circle and you get out in the workforce and really anywhere now, you're going to have friends and people that you care about that will call themselves gay or bi or anything else. Or even people who are Christians but struggle with same-sex attraction. That's a complicated thing. I could talk about it elsewhere. But I hope you see what's happened is not, let's let the government get more out of the bedroom, more smaller government in the sex lives of people, which in fact happened was a very aggressively positive political movement, arguing for an ideology, pressuring an ideology on the military. I was in the Marine Corps I was in training when Don't Ask, Don't Tell was overturned, and they came out and I can't tell you what the drill instructor said, but a sergeant came out and said, well, gay men have the right to serve their country too. And the thing was, yeah, there were men in the military who were, gay. I knew one sergeant, super nice guy. He was married and he had a man on the side, which I have no respect for. And yet we still got along at the workplace. The difference was now this ideology is being pushed on the military. And now it becomes an issue. Now we have grown adult men walking around in public naked in front of children. We have people sexualizing, expressing their sexuality very crudely in front of children or in primetime television. We have people writing papers, probably intellectuals, about queer gender theory and how that can benefit nuclear warhead policy. This is moral insanity, and somebody has to put their foot down. I think Barack Obama meant a lot to a lot of black people because he was the first black president, and I can sympathize with that. And yet, in my opinion, I think he did more to promote this postmodern, deconstructionist, divisive LGBTQ agenda than he did helping black communities. I think race relations have gotten worse. I grew up in the 90s. I've been around a while now, but I've been around long enough to remember race relations were poor sort of before my time. Even that's not even universal. Some of these people got along just fine. But in my day, early 90s, early 2000s, things were pretty nice for a lot of people. It wasn't a lot of racial tension everywhere. It's gotten worse since then. It's gotten worse since Barack Obama, because I think he sees America as this sort of negative, oppressive thing, and instead of leading, he sort of talks down to. Instead of bringing hope and optimism, he began to shift towards divisiveness and lecturing and talking down to. Less about unifying and hope and more about shame and condescension. And this is why I think Donald Trump, yet again, won the election. Because for all the things, I think some of the people who support him, some people say some silly, cheesy stuff. There's cringe on both sides. If you think it's just cringe on the right, my lens, look at what's happening on the left. But it's not everybody on the right. But white, Latino, a lot of black men, conservative, moderate, even some liberals, voting for President Trump. One, because he projects success, and one, he seems to think that he actually likes our country. He's not an intellectual. I think he is intelligent, but he's not an intellectual in the way that Obama was. But he's not being fed by these ideas that influenced the universities decades ago. So what I'd like to have happen is America sort of needs reform, sure. Needs to make progress in some ways, sure. But most of what's been done, I think, in the last 10 years has not been progress. So I would like to see the Democratic Party and America in general ditch the postmodernist, divisive model, which I think actually can be a Marxist reading of history. There was a guy named Howard Zinn. My friends are laughing right now. I hate Howard Zinn's books. There's a movie called Good Will Hunting, and in that movie, great movie, lots of cussing, but good movie, about this guy who just couldn't afford the universities, but is super intelligent, couldn't get into MIT. But Robin Williams' character, a psychologist, takes him under his wing and realizes he's brilliant. And he in that movie, Matt Damon pitches two books, Howard Zinn's A People's History of the United States and Noam Chomsky's Manufacturing Consent. And both of those books, at the time, were seen as fringe. Howard Zinn's read of American history is nonsense. And yet now it's become mainstream. It's the 1619 Project. It's not looking at nuances or other counterfacts of history, sometimes making things up, to give this overwhelmingly negative view of America's history. I think there are people on the right who have a naive, glossy view of America's past as being so wonderfully good. This is the opposite of that and more destructive. I think America should ditch that. And in my view, we should focus less on identity, focus less on what divides us, focus on what can unify us. And in my view, the best hope of America is in trying to return to virtue, focusing less on self and hedonism and consumerism and my autonomy and my this, that, or the other, and more on men living honorably and virtuous lives, women striving for virtue, loving our neighbors and doing our best to love our enemies as ourselves. I think those things will help America. Anyway, just some thoughts, take them for what they're worth. Overall, I wanted to believe in Barack Obama, and I could say good things about him, and I have. Overall, I don't think he was a successful president. I think Joe Biden was worse, but I think he's a missed opportunity. Even still, I wish those that voted for him well. Whoever you are, whatever you believe, whether you agree or not, I hope you know your life does matter. Someone somewhere loves you, so take care of yourself. Remember that dark days pass, and life is worth living. So get outside, get some sunshine, eat some healthy foods, get some sleep, take care of yourself, and try to do something good for your community. It'll make your life just a little bit better. As always, I thank you for watching. God bless.